Picture this. A royal carriage gliding through foggy London, silk whispering, wheels hissing on wet cobblestone, when the Duke suddenly yanks the reins on destiny itself. Why would Duke Arthur stop in the middle of a parade and step down into the mud without even looking at his fiancée, Sophia? Who is the poor maid standing on the curb? And why does the Duke's icy gaze shatter the moment he sees her? And those two little faces, identical twins, why do they look like they belong in a grand portrait, not the streets? What secret did the Duke bury so deep? It takes one public moment to drag it into the light. And Sophia, proud, untouchable, indomitable, will she be humiliated? Or will she turn this scandal into a weapon? Because tonight, titles won't protect anyone. And love is about to start a war. If you're ready for a Regency romance packed with betrayal, obsession, and shocking truths, hit subscribe right now. Like this video if you love dramatic revelations. Share it with a friend who lives for period scandals. And comment below, should a duke choose duty or the woman he never forgot? London wore its finest hypocrisy that afternoon, stitched in velvet and sealed with perfume. The air itself seemed trained to behave, cold, damp, and obedient. Yet it carried the restless breath of the streets, coal smoke, wet stone, and the sharp sweetness of crushed fruit from a vendor's cart. Beneath that haze, a royal promenade rolled forward with measured arrogance, as if even time had been harnessed to the reins of tradition. Duke Arthur sat as though he had been carved from winter, not simply calm, commanding, the sort of man whose silence could empty a room faster than any shouted threat. His presence did not ask for space, it claimed it: dark cloth, immaculate gloves, a gaze fixed ahead with a discipline that felt almost cruel. He was the kind of noble the city whispered about with equal parts awe and resentment, an heir to old power, a fist hidden inside a silk sleeve. Beside him, Sophia wore her title-to-be like armor. Her gown breathed softly with each movement, and the jewels at her throat caught the pale day with a cold, controlled sparkle. People like to imagine women like Sophia were trained to smile, trained to nod, trained to fade into a man's shadow. Sophia did none of those things. She watched the world with the steady attention of someone who refused to be ornamental. When she smiled, it was not submission, it was strategy. "London is in love with you today," she said, voice smooth as satin over steel. "They adore a duke who looks like he was born without a heartbeat." Arthur did not turn his head. "And do you?" Sophia's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and bright. "I adore what is useful," she replied, as if confessing nothing at all. "A marriage is useful. A duke is useful. Love is an indulgence the poor can afford." A pause sat between them, heavy and deliberate. In it, the distant cheers rose and fell like an ocean. And Sophia could sense what others could not. The Duke's restraint was not peace. It was a cage he kept locked from the inside. She studied him the way one studies a blade, admiring its precision while respecting what it could do. Arthur had never been careless, never been impulsive, never been the sort of man to give the world a spectacle it hadn't paid for. Their engagement had been arranged with the same perfection as a military campaign, alliances secured, rumors managed, rivals silenced with polite smiles and closed doors. Yet today, something unsettled him. Not visibly, not in any way a court gossip could easily describe. But Sophia had learned long ago that a man's smallest fracture was often his most dangerous truth. His jaw tightened as if tasting iron. His fingers flexed once inside the gloves, then stilled again. The promenade continued, and the city continued performing gratitude. Sophia's posture remained flawless, her expression serene. Still, a thread of instinct pulled tight in her chest. An old, unsentimental warning. A storm does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a sudden hush, a shift in air, a change no one else notices until it is too late. Arthur's gaze moved, almost imperceptibly, away from the path ahead, not toward the crowd as a whole, but toward a single point among them, low, near the curb, where the fog clung thicker and the street seemed darker. Sophia followed the direction of his attention, and in that moment, the world felt as though it had leaned forward to listen. The horses slowed, the rhythm faltered, and the Duke, London's untouchable Duke, looked as if he had just seen a ghost that knew his name. The moment the rhythm broke, the city's breath caught with it. Admiration is loyal only while it is entertained. The crowd's cheer softened into a wary hush, like velvet dragged across a blade. The cold air sharpened, carrying the sour tang of wet wool and the metallic bite of rain about to fall. Somewhere, a child laughed too loudly, then was shushed, because even joy sensed it was standing too close to scandal. Sophia did not move first. She never moved first when the world was watching. She held her posture the way a queen holds a throne, by making stillness look inevitable. Yet her eyes, bright as cut glass, followed Arthur's gaze with surgical precision. "What is it?" she asked, quiet enough to be intimate, firm enough to be an order. Arthur did not answer. He did not soften. He did not offer her the courtesy of explanation. The Duke's attention, always rationed, always controlled, had been stolen in a single glance, and Sophia felt the theft like a slap. The horses slowed further. A murmur crawled through the onlookers. A gentleman's voice rose, playful, then faltered as if someone had gripped his throat. Even the air seemed to recoil from the sudden breach of etiquette. Royal promenades did not pause. Great men did not hesitate. Promises did not wobble on their feet. Sophia's fingers tightened at her side, the fine fabric beneath them whispering as it strained. She turned her head slightly toward Arthur, the motion graceful, the intention lethal. "Arthur," she said again, and this time his name carried warning. "Do not embarrass me. Not today." His jaw shifted, as if he were grinding down a memory between his teeth. The silence that followed her words was not indecision. It was violence restrained. Then, without looking at her, he reached for the latch. Sophia's pulse struck hard against her throat. 1,000 rules lived in her bones, rules written by men who feared disorder. A woman's dignity was supposed to be fragile, easily cracked, easily blamed. Sophia had never been fragile. Still, even she understood the brutal arithmetic of society. One public humiliation could cost her years of power. "Stay," she said, as if she could anchor him with a single syllable. "You can send someone. You can—" The door opened. Cold rushed in, and Arthur rose with the inevitability of a verdict. He stepped down as though the street belonged to him, as though mud had no right to stain a man who owned half a county. The crowd parted instinctively, offended and fascinated in equal measure. Sophia watched, her face composed, but her thoughts moved fast and sharp. Who could make him break like this? Who could command his attention more than his own reputation? She followed his line, and at the edge of the curb she saw her answer. Poverty gathered into one small, stubborn silhouette. A young woman stood half-shielding 2 children pressed against her skirts. Their clothing was thin, patched, too light for the cold. One of them coughed, small and rough. The other stared with solemn, wide eyes that seemed too old for such a young face. The woman's hair was pinned back with a practicality that spoke of work, not vanity. Her hands were red with cold. The skin split at the knuckles as though life had tried to break her and failed. She held herself upright anyway, not begging, not performing misery, enduring it. Arthur moved toward them without hesitation, boots striking wet stone. The closer he came, the more his composure fractured, not into weakness, but into something raw and dangerous. His gaze locked on the children first, as if they were the only truth left standing. Sophia descended at last, each step measured, each breath controlled. She refused to rush, refused to look like a woman chasing a man. Still, the distance between her and Arthur felt suddenly vast, filled with the cold laughter of strangers. Arthur stopped before the woman and the twins. For a heartbeat, his face was still. Then his eyes changed, as though he had been struck, and the woman lifted her head, meeting him with a look that held years of silence. A look that said she knew him. Her gaze did not plead. It did not soften to make itself acceptable. It landed on Arthur with the weary precision of someone who had learned that hope was a luxury, and that luxury always came with a price. For a moment, the Duke's famous composure held. Balanced on the edge of collapse, his eyes traced the line of her face as though searching for a door he had once known in the dark. The street noise seemed to blur into a distant, irrelevant hum. He spoke her name without sound at first, lips shaping a memory. Then the syllables emerged, low and cracked at the edges. Evelyn. Sophia felt the name strike the air like a dropped glass. Not because it was loud, but because it was intimate. A name spoken that way did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to the past, wounded, hidden, and suddenly alive. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "You should not be here," she said, voice steady despite the tremor of cold around her. "Not like this." Arthur's attention dipped again to the twins. They stood so close together they looked like one shadow split into two. One clutched Evelyn's skirt with small, stubborn fingers. The other watched Arthur with unsettling calm, the kind that children wore when they had already seen too much. The Duke's throat moved. He swallowed as if the air had turned to ash. He extended his hand, slowly, carefully, as though afraid any sudden motion would shatter something fragile he could not afford to break. The nearer twin did not flinch. Instead, the child's gaze flicked to the signet ring on Arthur's finger, and there was a spark of recognition that had no right to exist. Arthur froze. Sophia stepped closer, silk whispering against resolve. She did not hurry. She did not hesitate. Her voice arrived cool and precise, the tone of a woman who refused to be made small by surprise. "So," she said, "this is the reason London stopped breathing." Arthur did not look at her. That, more than any insult, tightened Sophia's spine. She had been promised a man who never lost control, a man who would be loyal to order, to legacy, to her. Yet here he was, kneeling with his gaze fixed on children whose poverty did not even have the decency to be discreet. Evelyn's eyes slid to Sophia, and the air between them turned sharp. There was no curtsy, no apology, only a blunt assessment, as if Evelyn could taste the privilege on Sophia's tongue and had decided it was not worth fearing. Sophia lifted her chin a fraction. "You recognize him," she said, not asking, stating. "And he recognizes you." Evelyn's reply was a faint, humorless breath. "Recognition is not the same as rescue." Arthur's hand lowered, then rose again, uncertain for the first time in years. The Duke, who could intimidate ministers with a glance, looked suddenly like a man standing before his own grave. His voice dropped, rough with restraint. "How long?" he began, then stopped, as if the answer might rip him open in public. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the twins' shoulders. Protective, possessive. Not as a servant clinging to pity, but as a mother guarding what the world would gladly take. "Long enough," she said. "Long enough to learn what men with titles do when their promises become inconvenient." Sophia's eyes narrowed, not with jealousy, but with recognition of a threat. Not Evelyn, truth. Truth was always the most dangerous guest at a noble gathering. Arthur's gaze lifted at last, meeting Evelyn's fully. The ice in him did not melt. It fractured, exposing something darker underneath, fury, grief, and a fear he could not command. His voice fell to a near whisper, but it carried like thunder. "Are they mine?" Evelyn did not answer at once, and the pause felt like a hand closing around every throat on the street. Her silence was not confusion, it was control. It was the hard-earned discipline of a woman who had learned that truth, spoken too quickly, could be used like a rope. The twins shifted, pressed closer to her skirts, sensing the tension the way animals sense an approaching storm. One of them stared at Arthur's ring with a stubborn fascination, as if the crest were a story he almost understood. The other studied Arthur's face, unblinking, calm in a way that unsettled, too calm for a child who had never been safely held by the world. Arthur's question hung between them, raw and indecent in its simplicity. "Are they mine?" Sophia inhaled, slow and measured, as though she could trap her own fury behind her ribs. The cold seeped through the soles of her shoes, but it was not the weather that chilled her. It was the realization that she was standing at the edge of a private history that did not include her, and that Arthur had dragged her into it without permission. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "Not here," she said at last, voice level. "Not in front of them." Arthur's eyes sharpened, almost feral with restraint. "That's not an answer." "It is the only one you deserve," Evelyn returned, and the words carried no tremble, no softness. She did not look away. She did not bow to his title. "You want honesty now, when the world is listening? You want it clean and convenient, with witnesses?" Sophia stepped forward, silk whispering, posture immaculate. "You speak boldly for someone who stands before a duke," she said, and her tone was polite enough to pass for civility, if one ignored the edge that could cut glass. Evelyn turned to her with a directness that refused hierarchy. "And you stand boldly for someone who thinks a title is a shield," she replied. "Tell me, does it keep you warm at night?" Sophia's smile flickered, not from fear, but from insult. She had survived drawing rooms that could devour women alive. She had learned to turn humiliation into currency. Still, Arthur's refusal to look at her burned hotter than any rude remark. "Arthur," Sophia said, each syllable deliberate, "you will return to the carriage. You will remember what day this is. You will remember whose hand you have publicly abandoned." Arthur finally turned his head, and the intensity in his gaze struck like a physical force. His voice stayed low, but it was not gentle. "Not now, Sophia." The dismissal landed with the intimacy of a betrayal. Sophia's spine straightened further, pride hardening into something sharper. She could endure gossip. She could endure cruelty. She would not endure being erased. Evelyn shifted her grip on the twins as if preparing to leave, as if she would not let this become a spectacle. "You should go," she told Arthur. "Your world has rules. Mine has hunger. Don't pretend they are the same." Arthur's hand lifted again, not to touch her. He seemed to know better, but to reach toward the children with a cautious helplessness. "I didn't know," he said, and the confession sounded like a man trying to breathe underwater. Evelyn's eyes flashed. "You didn't ask," she countered. A ripple of movement stirred behind them, whispers threading through the crowd, excitement turning predatory. Somewhere among the onlookers, a well-dressed gentleman's laughter slipped out, too pleased, too interested, as if he had just been handed a weapon wrapped in lace. Sophia heard it, and her instincts tightened like a drawn wire, because this was no longer only a scandal, it was an opportunity for anyone cruel enough to seize it. By nightfall, the story had already learned to walk on its own. It slithered through drawing rooms and along candle-lit corridors, dressed in polite phrases and sharpened by delighted disbelief. It hid behind fans that fluttered like frightened birds, and it lived inside the space between a compliment and a question. London did not need proof to feast. It only needed permission. And permission arrived the moment the Duke's carriage had stopped. Sophia entered the first salon with her spine straight and her expression serene, as if serenity were an inheritance. The air inside was warmer, thicker, heavy with beeswax, wine, and expensive perfume sweet enough to disguise rot. Silk brushed against silk, rings kissed glass, laughter came soft and precise, the kind that never risked sincerity. "Darling Sophia," a lady cooed, eyes shining with false concern. "How unexpected today." Sophia's smile barely moved. "London has always adored the unexpected," she replied. It distracts people from their own disappointments. A few breaths of laughter followed, relieved and sharp. Then came the glances, quick as pickpockets, the tilt of a brow, the tiny widening of eyes. They were measuring her damage, the way one measures cracked porcelain, not to help, but to decide whether it was still worth displaying. She could feel them waiting for her to collapse into softness, to beg for sympathy, to become an entertaining ruin. Sophia gave them none of it. She moved like a blade in velvet, graceful and unbending. If she was being watched, then she would make watching expensive. Across the room, a gentleman leaned near a marble fireplace, swirling his brandy with idle confidence. Lord Hawthorne did not need to raise his voice to be heard. Men like him were born with listeners. His smile was charming in the way a lock is charming, because it promises a door and hides a trap. When Sophia's gaze met his, he inclined his head, respectful enough to look innocent. Then he approached, slow, unhurried, as if the room belonged to him in a different currency than titles. "My condolences," Hawthorne murmured. "Public surprises can be cruel." Sophia's eyes stayed calm. Cruelty implies honesty. London is rarely honest. Hawthorne's smile deepened. And yet it never lies without purpose. He took a delicate sip, then lowered the glass. A stopped carriage, a forgotten fiancée, a poor maid with two very interesting children. His tone suggested he was discussing a new opera. "Do you know how quickly the crown tires of embarrassment?" Sophia's fingers remained still. Inside her, something tightened, cold and precise. "Do you know how quickly a man tires of breathing when he speaks too freely?" Hawthorne's laugh was soft. "Ah, indomitable. That is why you were chosen, of course. The perfect duchess, unyielding enough to command respect, polished enough to be paraded." His eyes flicked, almost lazily, to her ringless hand. "But power is not a gown, Sophia. It can be taken off you." She stepped closer by a fraction, and the scent of her perfume, clean, expensive, unsentimental, cut through the warmth. "And it can be taken from you," she said. Hawthorne's gaze did not flinch. "I prefer to trade," he replied. "I came to offer you a kindness." "A kindness," Sophia repeated, as though tasting something spoiled. He leaned in, voice lowering. "Distance yourself, publicly. Let the scandal be his alone. A statement, perhaps. A hint of wounded virtue. The city will embrace you as the wronged angel." His eyes glinted. "And in return, I ensure the whispers turn away from your name. I can make London forget you were ever left sitting in that carriage." Sophia's smile sharpened. "And what do you want in exchange?" Hawthorne's gaze slid, smooth as oil. "Only that the maid and her twins be removed from the narrative, permanently. Poverty has a way of disappearing when the right hands apply pressure." The room around them continued to glitter. Music, laughter, the delicate clink of glass, while something darker settled behind Sophia's ribs. Not fear, not grief, a calm anger with excellent manners. She looked at Hawthorne as if he were a stain she intended to scrub out. "You mistake me," she said softly. "I do not survive by becoming smaller. I survive by making others regret underestimating me." Hawthorne's smile held, but his eyes cooled. "Then we understand each other," he murmured, "because I survive the same way." Sophia turned away without haste, leaving him with the faintest trace of her perfume and none of her uncertainty. Yet as she crossed the room, she felt it, the net tightening, not around Arthur alone, around her, around those children, around the secret that had stepped out of the fog and into the jaws of society. And somewhere behind the laughter, a decision was being made for her, unless she made it first. Sophia did not go home to weep into lace. She returned to the ducal townhouse with the same composure she had worn all evening. But the moment the door closed behind her, The warmth of the foyer felt like an insult. The air smelled of polished wood and money, clean, curated, confident. It was the scent of a world that believed itself untouchable. Sophia's heels clicked across the marble, as if counting down to war. A footman approached, careful, eyes lowered. "Your Grace." "Not yet," Sophia cut in, her voice soft enough to sound civilized, sharp enough to bruise. "And if anyone asks, I am not receiving. Not pity, not prayers, not opinions." She climbed the stairs without haste, every movement deliberate. In her chamber, candles burned with steady indifference, casting a honeyed light over pale walls and gilded frames. She removed her gloves slowly, fingertip by fingertip, as though stripping away the last layer of performance. Her hands were steady. Her thoughts were not. Arthur had humiliated her, publicly, effortlessly. And yet, what unsettled her more than the insult was the look she had seen in him. Something that did not belong to duty or strategy, something dangerously human. A knock sounded. Sophia did not invite it, yet the door opened anyway. Arthur stepped inside like a shadow given weight, his coat still carrying the damp bite of the street. His face was carved into its usual cold perfection, but his eyes were wrong, too awake, too dark, as if sleep had become impossible. "You should not be here," Sophia said, echoing Evelyn's earlier words, but making them her own. "Not in my room, not after today." Arthur's gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat, the air tightened. "We need to speak." Sophia gave a small laugh that held no humour. "How novel. You found your voice once the crowd was gone." His jaw flexed. "Sophia." "No," she interrupted, stepping closer, the silk of her gown whispering like restrained fury. "You do not get to use my name like a balm. You dragged me through the city like an accessory, and then—" Her breath caught, not from pain, but from rage that refused to spill messily. "Then you stepped down into the mud for another woman and 2 children you could not stop looking at." Arthur's eyes flickered, the first crack in the mask. "I didn't plan it." "That is precisely the problem," Sophia said. "You plan everything. You calculate every smile, every silence, every handshake, and yet you lost control for her. So tell me, what is she to you?" Arthur's voice dropped. "Someone I failed." Sophia studied him as if he were a letter written in invisible ink. "Failure is a convenient word," she murmured. "It sounds accidental. It sounds forgivable." A muscle in Arthur's cheek twitched. "You think I wanted this?" Sophia's gaze sharpened. "I think you wanted to forget it. There is a difference." Arthur took a step forward, and the room seemed to narrow around him. His presence filled space the way a storm fills a sky. "Hawthorne approached you," he said, not a question. Sophia's lips curved, faint and dangerous. "Ah, so you still know how to pay attention, just not when I'm sitting beside you." Arthur's eyes darkened. "What did he offer?" "What he always offers," Sophia replied, "a way out that costs someone else their life." Arthur's hand clenched. The sound of leather tightening was quiet, but it carried. "He won't touch them." Sophia tilted her head. "And how will you stop him? With another silence, another closed door, another polite threat?" She stepped even closer, refusing to be intimidated by the Duke's size, his title, his anger. "Your power is impressive, Arthur, but today it looked like fear dressed as discipline." For a second, his expression hardened into something almost savage. Then it faltered, just enough. "I don't know what they are to me," he admitted. The words scraped raw. "Not yet." Sophia's eyes did not soften. "But you know what I am to you," she said. Arthur's breath paused. Sophia's voice stayed calm, each syllable chosen like a weapon. I am the arrangement, the alliance, the woman you can stand beside without risking your heart. She leaned in, close enough that her perfume cut through the damp cold on his coat. And you will not sacrifice me to protect your reputation, while those children starve for your conscience. Arthur's gaze held hers, fierce and strained. What do you want? Sophia's smile returned, beautiful, ruthless. I want the truth, she said, and I want Hawthorne to learn what it means to pick the wrong woman to threaten. Sophia did not sleep. Sleep was for people who could afford to be unguarded. Before dawn, the townhouse still held its night breath. Warm embers fading in hearths, wax cooling in quiet drips, the faint, lingering perfume of yesterday's performance. Sophia moved through it as if she owned not only the rooms, but the secrets trapped inside their walls. She wrapped herself in a plain cloak, not to hide, but to signal intention. Tonight, she would not be admired, she would be obeyed. In the servants' corridor, the air changed. Less fragrance, more soap. Less velvet, more honest damp. She listened to the hush of footsteps, the careful pauses, the way a household learned to speak without being heard. Someone knew something. Someone had always known. A maid turned a corner and nearly collided with her. The girl's eyes widened, terrified, then dropped to the floor as if it might swallow her. Sophia's voice stayed soft, almost kind. Look at me, she said. The maid's gaze lifted, trembling. Who paid you to forget what you saw yesterday? Sophia asked. The maid's lips parted, but no sound came. Fear lived in her throat like a locked gate. Sophia leaned closer, calm as winter. If you are afraid of the Duke, you should know he does not punish loyalty. If you are afraid of someone else, then you have just told me who matters. The maid swallowed hard. No one paid me, she whispered, but everyone is talking. Everyone is always talking, Sophia murmured. I'm asking who is listening. The girl's eyes darted toward a door at the end of the passage, an old oak door that belonged to records and ledgers and the dust of decades. Sophia noted the glance, then dismissed the maid with a gesture that felt merciful only because it was efficient. In the records room, the smell of paper and dry ink wrapped around her like a shroud. Shelves climbed the walls, heavy with books that contained the true anatomy of power. Payments, favors, names disguised as numbers. This was the bloodstream of the house. Quiet, invisible, essential. Sophia ran her fingers along the spines until she found the volume she wanted. Bound in dark leather, stamped with the ducal crest. Household disbursements, private funds, incidental expenses that never appeared in polite conversation. She opened it, turning pages with the care of someone handling poison. Dates, sums, neat lines of handwriting. The steadiness of the pen felt arrogant, as if the writer believed ink could sanctify any sin. Then she saw it, a payment, years old, large enough to buy silence for a lifetime. No name, only a coded reference and a note that made Sophia's pulse strike once, hard. Relocation, immediate, for the preservation of the house. Sophia read it again, slower. Preservation. The word aristocrats used when they meant sacrifice. A shadow stirred in the doorway. Sophia did not turn. Close the door, she said. It clicked shut. You shouldn't be here. Arthur's voice came from the dark, low and dangerous. Sophia finally faced him, ledger open like an accusation. And yet, she replied, I am exactly where your household hoped I would never stand. Arthur's gaze dropped to the page, and something tightened behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition, the kind that tasted like betrayal. This is old, he said, too controlled. This is a wound that never stopped bleeding, Sophia countered. Someone used your name, your money, your house, and they did it to make sure Evelyn disappeared before she could stain your future. Arthur's jaw set. Who? Sophia's smile was thin. That is the question, isn't it? Not whether the twins are yours, because your face answered that yesterday. The question is, how many hands were paid to steal your choice? Arthur took the ledger from her, his fingers tight on the leather as if he could crush the past into pulp. Hawthorne, he said, voice roughening. He's behind this. Sophia stepped closer, her eyes bright with cold fire. He didn't do it alone, she said. A man like Hawthorne buys doors, but someone inside had to open them. Arthur's breathing deepened, anger turning heavier, more focused. If this comes out... It will, Sophia cut in. Because Hawthorne won't stop at whispers. He will stage it. He will parade those children like a trophy and call it morality. Her gaze did not flinch from his. And if you hesitate, he will destroy Evelyn. And he will destroy me for sport. Arthur's voice dropped to something almost feral. He won't touch you. Sophia's laugh was soft, merciless. Men always say that right before they fail. Arthur stared at the ledger as if it were a confession written in blood. Then, slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers, ice cracking, just enough. What do you propose? He asked. Sophia's expression turned calm in the way storms turned calm before they struck. We let him believe he has the stage, she said, and then we take it from him. The invitation arrived dressed as courtesy, sealed in wax and scented with false innocence. A night of music, of candlelight, of reconciliation, so the wording promised. But Sophia could smell danger beneath the perfumed ink, the way one could smell smoke before seeing flame. Hawthorne wanted a stage, not a rumour whispered behind fans, but a spectacle fed to the city's hunger with silver cutlery. He wanted the aristocracy gathered in one room, breathing the same air, watching the same humiliation unfold as if it were entertainment purchased with their titles. Sophia dressed without trembling. Her gown was dark, not mourning but warning, fabric that drank the light and returned it as quiet authority. Jewelry sat at her throat like a vow to herself, not a tribute to any man. She wore her composure the way others wore prayer, daily, necessary, unbreakable. If tonight was to be a massacre, then she would not be carried out as a victim. She would be the last thing Hawthorne saw before his victory rotted in his hands. Arthur waited in silence when she descended, his expression controlled, but his eyes betrayed an unrest that no discipline could fully cage. The ledger's secret lay between them like a blade wrapped in velvet. The past had teeth, and it was hungry. Remember, Sophia said softly, he will try to make you react. Arthur's gaze fixed on hers, fierce and strained. And if he succeeds? Sophia's mouth curved, minimal and lethal. Then we make his success look like a confession. The ballroom greeted them with warmth that felt indecent. Candles burned in clusters, heavy draperies held the heat, and laughter floated through the room as if cruelty had never existed. People smiled the way predators smiled, pleasantly, patiently, waiting for blood. The air was thick with perfume and wine, with beeswax and ambition. Every sound seemed polished, every compliment sharpened at the edges. Hawthorne moved through the crowd like a man already celebrating. When his eyes found Sophia, he inclined his head with the respect of someone offering a prayer, while plotting a sacrifice. His mouth shaped her name as if it belonged to him. Sophia did not look away. She watched the room instead, noting the currents. The eager women clustered like birds around a rumour, the men exchanging amused glances, the older matrons smiling too slowly. They all pretended to be civilized, but civilization was merely a curtain. Tonight, Hawthorne intended to tear it down. Music swelled, couples turned, conversation glittered. And then, subtle as a knife sliding free, Hawthorne lifted his glass and offered a toast. To virtue, he began, voice smooth and loud enough to command attention without seeming to demand it. To honor. To the noble sacrifices we make for the good of our great houses. The room responded with murmurs of approval, and Sophia felt the trap tighten, the net drawing closed. Hawthorne's gaze drifted, deliberately, toward Arthur. And to truth, Hawthorne continued, savouring the word. Even when it arrives, unexpectedly. A hush rolled outward, swallowed laughter, silenced flirtation. Sophisticated faces arranged themselves into concern. Curious eyes sharpened. The room leaned forward. Sophia's pulse stayed steady. She could almost admire the elegance of the cruelty. Hawthorne gestured lightly, as though introducing a charming diversion. Come, he said, let us welcome a reminder that the streets of London are not so far from our polished floors. The doors opened. Evelyn stepped inside with the twins, framed by the room's golden warmth and dressed in nothing but stubborn dignity. The children clung close, their faces lifted toward the glittering strangers with the wary stillness of those who had learned not to trust kindness. Whispers ignited. Shock rippled. Someone laughed and quickly hid it behind a cough. A woman's fan snapped open like a startled wing. Arthur's body went rigid, as if the room itself had struck him. For one suspended heartbeat, the Duke's mask held, ice clinging to fracture. Sophia moved. She stepped forward, before anyone could speak first, claiming the silence as if it were her birthright. Her voice cut through the hush, low but carrying, calm but absolute. How brave, she said, to use children as theatre. Hawthorne's smile did not falter, but his eyes narrowed. Sophia's gaze swept the room, and when she spoke again, her words did not beg for sympathy. They commanded judgment. If virtue requires an audience, she murmured, then it is not virtue at all. It is vanity. The room shifted, uncomfortable, the first crack in Hawthorne's perfect evening. Arthur's breath came deeper, heavier. His eyes locked on the twins, and the same fierce tenderness threatened to split him open. Then, without looking at Hawthorne, without asking permission from the room, Arthur spoke, voice steady enough to shake the chandeliers. They are mine. The declaration did not merely silence the room, it rearranged it. Breath stalled in jeweled throats. A few faces brightened with scandal's greedy pleasure, while others tightened with moral panic, as if inheritance itself had begun to rot under the chandeliers. The word mine had weight in aristocratic air. It carried land, bloodlines, laws, and the brutal promise of consequence. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively, drawing the twins closer, as if the Duke's truth might summon blades from smiles. The children stared up at him with a solemnity that did not belong to innocence. One blinked slowly, absorbing a world that had never asked their permission to exist. Hawthorne recovered first, because men like him were built for recovery. His laughter slipped out, light and incredulous, the sound of a man trying to turn a guillotine into a joke. How noble, he purred, eyes gleaming. How convenient. A confession delivered at the perfect dramatic moment. Tell me, Arthur, are you claiming them out of honour or out of desperation? Arthur's expression did not change, but the air around him hardened. Out of truth, he said. 2 words, and yet they struck like a door slammed shut. Hawthorne's gaze slid to Sophia, triumphant, as if expecting her to crumble under the weight of being publicly replaced by a past she hadn't chosen. He offered her a smile of practiced sympathy, the sort that pretended to comfort while sharpening humiliation. Poor Sophia, he said softly, loud enough to be heard. To be so forgotten. Sophia's chin lifted. If the room wanted a victim, it had chosen the wrong woman. Her voice emerged calm, almost languid, danger wearing silk gloves. Forgotten, she repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. No, Lord Hawthorne, I've been observing. She stepped forward, and the crowd's attention followed as if compelled. She did not plead for their empathy. She claimed their interest and turned it into a weapon. In her hands, scandal became a blade with a polished handle. "You brought a mother and her children here," Sophia continued, eyes bright and merciless. "Not as guests, but as evidence, as spectacle, as leverage." Her gaze cut across the room, daring anyone to deny it. "But leverage only works when the truth is on your side." Hawthorne's smile thinned. And you believe it is on yours?" Sophia's fingers produced a folded document, then another, paper that looked ordinary, until one understood what paper could do in a world ruled by signatures. "I believe," she said softly, "that you have mistaken your charm for immunity." A ripple moved through the listeners as she read names, dates, sums, figures that sounded like prayers spoken backward. Payment for relocation, payment for preservation of the house, coded references that suddenly felt less like bookkeeping and more like burial. Hawthorne's eyes sharpened with warning. "Those mean nothing." "They mean everything," Sophia replied, and her smile turned colder, because the funds came from the Duke's household accounts and were authorized through channels you have no right to touch unless someone granted you access. She let that hang, a slow poison seeping into the room's conscience. "So the question is not whether the twins belong to Arthur. The question is how far you went to ensure Evelyn would vanish before she ever had the chance to speak." Hawthorne's composure faltered. Just a flicker, but in a room built on appearances, a flicker was a collapse beginning. "This is absurd," he snapped, and the snap itself betrayed him. A woman scorned and a duke cornered, waving paper like prophecy. Sophia's gaze did not move. "A man exposed," she corrected quietly, "always calls truth absurd." Arthur's voice followed, lower, heavier, carrying the threat of law and something more primal. "You arranged her disappearance." Hawthorne's smile tried to return, but it trembled at the edges. "I protected society from your youthful indiscretion." Sophia stepped closer, not intimidated, not swayed. "No," she said. "You protected your advantage, and you thought you could threaten me into becoming your accomplice." Her eyes glittered. "But I do not negotiate with men who use children as currency." For the first time, Hawthorne's mask cracked wide enough for the room to see what lived beneath. Fury, panic, ugliness. His voice rose, losing its polish. "Do you know who you're accusing?" he hissed. "Do you know what I can ruin?" Sophia held his gaze as if she were watching a candle gutter out. "I know exactly what you are," she said. "And now, so do they." The next morning, London still tasted of last night's outrage, sweet on the tongues that had enjoyed it, bitter in the mouths that feared what it meant. Yet inside the Duke's townhouse, the air was stripped of performance. No music, no laughter polished into lies. Only the clean, relentless sound of decisions being made. Arthur stood at the window as if the city outside were a battlefield he could finally admit existed. His shoulders were rigid, but his hands, those hands that had always looked so certain, rested open at his sides, empty of excuses. When Sophia entered, he turned, and the mask on his face was not entirely ice anymore. It was something harder to wear. Accountability. "You were right," he said quietly. "I thought discipline was strength. I used it to avoid pain, to avoid choosing." Sophia's gaze was steady, unkind in its honesty. She did not reward confession with softness. "And when you avoided choosing," she replied, "you chose anyway. You chose yourself." Arthur's jaw tightened as if the truth had teeth. "I ended it," he said, "with Hawthorne, with anyone in my household who took coin to control my life." His eyes darkened. "There will be inquiries. Official ones. I will not hide behind favors." Sophia moved closer, her footsteps measured, her expression composed. "Good," she said, "but do not mistake justice for redemption. They are not the same." For a moment, Arthur looked as though he might reach for her, out of habit, out of desperation, out of the old belief that power could keep what it had already wounded. But Sophia's stare stopped him where he stood. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked, voice calm as a blade laid flat on a table. "Is that why you're confessing like a man seeking absolution?" Arthur's throat worked. "I want—" He stopped, as if the word he needed was too fragile to speak. "I want to repair what I broke." Sophia's lips curved in something that was not a smile. "You cannot repair a woman by offering her a better cage," she said. "You cannot repay humiliation with a title." "I never meant to humiliate you." "I know," Sophia answered, and there was the cruelty of clarity in it. "That is what makes it worse. You did it without thinking I mattered." Arthur flinched, and the movement was small, but real. The Duke, who had been unshakable, had learned, at last, what it was to be shaken by a woman who refused to beg. Sophia exhaled slowly. "End the engagement publicly," she said. "Not with pity, not with rumours, with respect. Let London see that I was not discarded. I am leaving." Arthur's eyes held hers, fierce with regret. "And you?" Sophia's gaze did not soften. "I will become something your world cannot pretend to own," she said. "I will be remembered as myself." Later, when Sophia's decision had settled like stone, Arthur went to Evelyn without entourage, without pride masquerading as generosity. The room where she stayed was spare, the air carrying the honest scent of soap, damp cloth, and thin broth. The twins watched him with the same wary calm, as if they were judging whether he was danger or shelter. Arthur did not kneel this time. He stood straight and spoke as a man who finally understood that apology was not a currency. It was a beginning. "I cannot undo what was done," he said, "but I can stop pretending my name is clean while you carry the stain." Evelyn's eyes were steady, tired, unbending. "I don't want your guilt," she replied. "I want your presence, your protection, your constancy, and if you fail again, you will not be given another chance." Arthur nodded once, as if accepting a sentence he had earned. "Then I won't fail." Outside, the city continued to whisper, because London always whispered. But inside that small, stubborn pocket of truth, a different kind of sound rose, quiet, fragile, and real, the first breath of a life no longer built on secrecy.